Welcome viewers to the Krasmodo channel. V-twin motorcycles include Harley-Davidson's iconic sound, Ducati's balanced engines, various Japanese choppers, Moto Guzzi's longitudinal V-twin, the Battle of Twins race, Burt Munro's Indian record, and much more. Throughout the long history of motorcycle development, many two-wheeled machines have been equipped with this type of engine. In this segment, my goal is to talk about the V-twin itself, its history, and some early and interesting examples of motorcycles that used it. And once we figure out the main points, we'll continue the story by increasing the cylinder angle, starting from 18 degrees on the matchless silver Arrow up to 170 degrees on the Zundap KS750. At the same time, I'll try to explain what guided manufacturers in choosing one angle or another. Let's talk briefly about V-twin motorcycles. Get comfortable. This will be interesting. Let's begin with the terminology. A V-twin is a two-cylinder engine with cylinders arranged in a V shape, sharing a crankshaft. The two cylinders are positioned at a certain angle to each other, which can vary depending on the conditions and requirements. For most V-twin engines, this angle ranges from 40 to 90 degrees, but there are exceptions. Theoretically, the angle of a V-twin can be anywhere from 0 to 180 degrees. Most V-twin engines have a single crank pin, which is shared by both connecting rods. Connecting rods can be offset from each other, making the cylinder offset visually noticeable. Or they can be of the fork and blade or blade type, which doesn't allow for offset, helping to avoid twisting forces on the crankshaft. The most prominent example of engines with non-offset connecting rods on a motorcycle is Harley-Davidson. A much smaller number of such engines still have an offset crank pin. For example, on the Moto Guzzi V-twin 500, it was 180 degrees. On the 1983 Honda Shadow 750 model, the crank pin offset was 75 degrees. In the model for the American market, it was 45. A similar story happened with the Suzuki VX800 and the Intruder 750 models. Let me explain a bit ahead of time. Reducing the crank pin angle from 75 to 45 degrees made the engine more dynamic and gave the exhaust sound more charisma. And now, having refreshed the main principles in our memory, we can move on to the history. By the late 19th century, multi-cylinder engines were possible. The internal combustion engine had been invented, and new ways to increase its power were being explored. Initially, the first Deve S engines were single-cylinder, but soon the need to increase their power emerged. Engineers and designers quickly realized that by adding one or more cylinders, they could achieve an increase in power with only a slight increase in engine weight. The V-twin was a logical outcome of these developments. Another cylinder was added to the single-cylinder engine at a certain angle, which was determined based on considerations of optimal layout and ergonomics. It wasn't necessary to spread the cylinders too far apart for the sake of compactness. It was enough to create space for placing the intake tract and carburetor or the exhaust tract between the cylinders. Another important condition for determining the cylinder bank angle was to prevent the possibility of the piston skirts meeting near the bottom dead center. Turning a single-cylinder engine into a V-type engine turned out to be an achievable task. It was necessary to cut another opening in the engine crankcase for the second cylinder, add an extra connecting rod to the crankshaft, and figure out the valve timing and ignition system so that the processes would occur at the right time. The first patents for V-twins date back to 1880. The vast majority of sources credit Gottlieb Daimler with creating the first working V-twin internal combustion engine. This 17-degree twin was built and tested in 1889. Its cylinder diameter was 60 millimeters, and the piston stroke was 100 E. With simple calculations, we get a displacement of 565.5 cubic centimeters. The engine boasted a power output of 1.5 horsepower at 600 revolutions per minute. Gottlieb used this engine on a boat and on the Daimler Stahlradwagen car, which he built together with Wilhelm Maybach. However, it often happens that engineers come up with very similar inventions, almost simultaneously, often without even knowing about each other's existence. The late 19th century also saw several notable V-shaped engine designs. The first of these is this tricycle, created by George Long in 1880 as a one-off. This three-wheeled self-propelled cart was equipped with a 90-degree V-shaped steam engine. The design of the tricycle was patented by Long a little later. Around 1882 or 1883, and after a short period of use, the machine was dismantled. In 1946, a man named John Bateman tracked down the 96-year-old Long and, with his help, reassembled the machine, which to this day is on display at the Smithsonian Institution. Another interesting invention was the engine by Scott Dugald Clerk, who in 1881 patented this kind of two-stroke engine. Although it initially appears V-shaped, the second cylinder actually functioned as a supercharger. It's worth mentioning that many engineers tried to make a design with a supercharging cylinder work, including Nicholas Otto. In general, there was intensive work being done in the field of engine building, and if it hadn't been for Gottlieb Daimler in '89, someone else would have come up with the V-twin concept around the same time. As early as 1890, the French company Panhard Levasseur acquired a license to produce engines using Daimler's technology. That same year, Émile Levasseur and Louis Panhard presented the first prototype of a car with a V-twin engine. This engine was revolutionary. Being better balanced, it had much less vibration than any single-cylinder engine. It produced more power and could rev to higher RPMs. Another decade would pass, and the moment would come for one of its most legendary applications, on a motorcycle, and the popularity of V-twins would skyrocket. In the 10 years since the appearance of Daimler's gasoline V-twin, this engine had undergone some development, and the time had come for its use in two-wheeled vehicles. In reality, it's not so easy to determine who was the first to equip a motorcycle with a V-twin engine. The whole issue here is that in 1902, the first V-twin motorcycles started appearing like mushrooms after the rain. It's nearly impossible to reliably tell if this one was first and the rest were second, third, etc. So let's look at the big picture. The turn of the 19th to 20th century, 1899, 1901. During this time, French inventor Clément Ader, a pioneer in aviation and telephony, developed and patented a lightweight 90-degree four-stroke V engine for aviation use. Émile Robillon from the town of Puteaux was aware of Ader's work. Émile, during the period from 1900 to 1901, developed the concept of a motorcycle that would later be sold under the Motocardane brand. In 1900, two Ader's 90-degree leader twin was mounted longitudinally in the motorcycle frame. The second part of the name refers to the way torque is transmitted to the wheel. Other sources say this motorcycle began production in 1903. This is likely the first motorcycle ever with a drive shaft. Now, neither Moto Guzzi nor Peter Mosheroff, with the IJ-1 and IJ-2, invented the idea of a longitudinally mounted V-twin engine. The second machine, which also claims to be the first, was created in Britain. At the dawn of motorcycle manufacturing, there was a company called Princeps Auto Co. in the city of Northampton. Princeps motorcycles were produced by John Hatton, a sales agent for Panhard and Mercedes equipment, between 1902 and 1905. The manufacturer's name is now forgotten. In 1902, the Princeps lineup added a motorcycle with a two-cylinder V-shaped engine, producing 4 horsepower. The engine displacement was 422 cubic centimeters. The Motorcycling magazine on September 3, 1902, praised the two-cylinder Princeps for its low vibration, smooth ride, and strong power. The journalist noted that riding this motorcycle was as easy as riding a single-cylinder one. Another one of the first motorcycles with a V-twin was this Loren Clement, produced by Václav Loren and Václav Klement in Bohemia. It's now the Czech Republic, but it was Austria-Hungary then. This machine made its debut at the turn of 1902 to 1903. Here's another French motorcycle, the Gentle brand, from 1902. The next year, 1903, Enizu Motorenwerke, a German company, built its first motorcycle using a Swiss 3-horsepower V-twin engine. That year in Birmingham, Charles Garrard built the Clement Garrard motorcycle with a 3-horsepower narrow-angle V-twin engine. It is believed that the Clement Garrard had a cylinder angle of 30 degrees. In the same year, according to other sources, in 1904 in the United Kingdom, the company Eclipse Motor and Cycle released the XL All model with a 90-degree V engine producing 5 horsepower. The Eclipse motorcycle was marketed as a technological marvel. The advertising brochure claimed that it was the most powerful two-wheeled motor vehicle, which could also tow a trailer and accelerate up to 80 kilometers per hour. Also, any cylinder of the engine could be used separately, allowing the other to cool down, or both could be engaged for maximum power. 1903 marked the debut of British Iris motorcycles. Davy and Bouton launched a motorcycle twin, and French Griffon motorcycles also debuted. Within a few years of the first V-twin motorcycle prototypes, nearly every reputable European manufacturer was offering a V-twin model. Here, for example, is the French Givaudan machine from 1904, and here is the German Fafnir engine, which was purchased by about 20 motorcycle companies for their machines, and here is the Belgian Minerva motorcycle, and so on. Considering that during that period there were countless companies and workshops trying their hand at building motorized two-wheelers, listing all the motorcycle models could take a long time. It could take a very long time, but I won't do that. The main thing is, we understood that the V-twin was extremely advanced at that time and fit well into the concept of a motorcycle. That's why this engine's popularity soared in the early 20th century. Across the ocean, in the United States of America, the first motorcycle with a V-twin appeared in 1903. No, it wasn't Harley-Davidson or Indian. Do you recognize this gentleman in the photo? This is Glenn Hammond Curtis. Curtis is best known as the founder of American aviation. But like many other aviators of that time, he was also a motorcyclist and a daredevil. He didn't get the nickname Hell Rider for nothing. Back in 1899, Curtis built his first motorcycle. His brand was called Hercules. 2 years later, Glenn was making his own engines, which stood out from the competition. Curtis was among the first to use ball bearings throughout the engine, reducing internal friction compared to shafts rotating in poorly lubricated castings. He claimed that his engines produced the most power among all available motorcycles, and he was eager to prove it on the racetracks. In 1903, Glenn built a 5-horsepower V-twin motorcycle that debuted in May at New York's Riverdale Hill Climb Motorcycle Club. Curtis took first place out of 20 participants. Heading straight from there to Yonkers, Glenn won both the 1-mile and 5-mile races at Empire City Racetrack, thus making up for last year's poor race results. Twin Curtis had the following specifications: a displacement of 695 cubic centimeters and a maximum power of 5 horsepower. At 2,000 revolutions per minute, the cylinders were angled at 50 degrees. By the way, a little later in 1907, Helskagonschick will install 4 4.4-liter V8 engines into what is essentially a bicycle frame and accelerate to 219.5 kilometers per hour. At Wermont Beach, becoming the world's fastest man. But that's another story. Here's a quick hint about Glenn Curtis's record. His V-twin instantly drew industry attention, and other American motorcycle manufacturers, watching Curtis's success in races and record runs, wanted to repeat his achievements. A few months after Curtis's debut, Orient built their own V-twin, but Curtis's engine had much higher performance. Then the Indian company started hustling too. Oscar Hedstrom, a co-owner, met Curtis and his motorcycle in person back in 1903, and Oscar's pride was hurt. He decided to create a similar machine, both in terms of performance and engine layout. The racing Indian with a V-twin engine in the frame was ready by the summer of 1904, and the motorcycle made its public debut during a race on August 5, 1904, in Newport Beach, Rhode Island. Pay attention to the single-cylinder Indian model. Initially, the only cylinder remained a stressed element of the frame, while the second was attached to the crankcase at a 42-degree angle. Indian would stick to this angle until the late 1940s, when the company would start having problems and eventually wither away. I'll discuss the modern Indian later. For a few years, the Indian twin was only raced, but in 1906, the company began mass production of the model, positioning it as a sports bike. Initially, the Indian V-twin had a displacement of 633 cubic centimeters, but already in 1909, Handy and Hedstrom, the founding fathers of the company, set a new displacement standard, 988 cc. Competitors will likely follow their example. By the way, it might seem like Glenn Curtis has disappeared somewhere. That's right. He made a huge contribution by making the V-twin popular on the American continent. By decade's end, he focused his finances and attention entirely on aviation, leaving motorcycles behind. But what about the legend of American motorcycle manufacturing, Harley-Davidson? Things there were about the same as with most other manufacturers. William Harley and the Davidson brothers recognized the potential of the two-cylinder engine, and after briefly making single-cylinder machines, began developing a V-twin. In February 1907 at the Chicago Auto Show, a Harley-Davidson motorcycle with a V-twin engine of 880 cubic centimeters and about 7 horsepower was shown for the first time. The previous single-cylinder was 440 cc, and here, like Indian's first twin, the development doubled the engine displacement. These Harley-Davidsons were almost twice as powerful as the first single-cylinder models. The top speed was about 100 kilometers per hour. Between 1908 and 1909, sales of the machines grew from 450 units to 1,149. It's worth noting that the first twin from Harley had a number of issues and overall wasn't good enough. That's why this engine was only in serial production from 1909 to 1911. In 1911, the flathead engine was introduced, which lasted all the way until 1929. In the early 20th century, V-twins dominated many races. The first winner of the Tourist Trophy on the Isle of Man in the senior class, in the very first race of 1907, a Norton motorcycle with a Peugeot engine. The first non-British winner at the Tourist Trophy in 1911 was an Indian motorcycle with Oliver Godfrey at the helm. The Zenith motorcycle speed record, 1930 150 miles per hour, and the excellent J.A. Prestwich V-twin, and so on. It wasn't until the late 1930s that the inline twin began to rival the V-twin, soon followed by the four-cylinder. Let's return to early 20th century Britain. Jap, a highly titled future V-twin producer, was established there. This abbreviates the surname and first name of owner and designer John Alfred Prestwich. Johnny designed and built his first engine in 1901. Prestwich, like other early engine and motorcycle builders, recognized the promise of V-shaped engines, which were already emerging on motorcycles. In 1906, the first J.A. Prestwich V-twin appeared, the first overhead valve V-twin in human history. John Alfred Prestwich was instrumental in advancing British and global motorcycle industries, starting with his passion for motorcycle design and manufacturing. However, as early as 1908, he abandoned this idea and focused entirely on engine building. J.A. Prestwich. Engines were excellent, lightweight, reliable, and extremely efficient. They gained huge popularity. They were installed in the frames of motorcycles from at least 74 brands: British, French, German, American, and so on. These engines powered the excellent Brew Superior motorcycles. And the pinnacle of creation would be the 1.7-liter supercharged twins, which produced about 80 horsepower. This engine was used on Zenith, Osborne Engineering Company, and Brew Superior motorcycles to set speed records in the late 1920s and early 1930s. The machines reached speeds of around 240 to 245 kilometers per hour. You've probably heard about the desmodromic valve system. It's a trademark of Ducati engines, but it wasn't invented at Ducati. Jap patented the design of the desmodromic valve in 1923. However, even Prestwich wasn't the one who originally came up with this system. The pioneer was a certain Briton named Frank Hatfield Arnott. He was actually the one who came up with the desmodromic system in 1910, when he was conducting experiments to improve the reliability of valve timing systems. It's quite logical to ask, how are things with V-twins in the Soviet Union? Engines of this configuration were not widely used on Soviet motorcycles, but that doesn't mean they didn't exist. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics' first V-twin motorcycle was created by Avtodor leadership and engineers, led by Pyotr Vladimirovich Mozharov. In 1927, Mozharov and engineer Adamovich traveled to Germany to learn about motorcycle construction. The first 5 prototypes of IZH motorcycles were presented in September 1929. The IZH-1 and IZH-2 were equipped with a 1,200cc longitudinal V-twin engine producing 24 horsepower. The IZH-2 was more suited for off-road conditions. Its engine had a forced air cooling system for more efficient cooling, as well as a drive to the sidecar wheel. The IZH-1 and IZH-2 chassis were mostly inspired by BMW motorcycle designs. However, Mozharov rejected the engine layout typical of BMW, considering the cylinders sticking out on the sides not to be the best solution. A V-shaped longitudinal twin was developed for this reason. Another early IZH motorcycle, the Model 3, used a 750cc V-twin engine from the German company Wanderer. These motorcycles took part in the second All-Russian motorcycle rally in September-October 1929. The machine successfully completed the rally route and the journey from Izhevsk to Moscow and back. That's about 3,300 kilometers. However, all 5 motorcycle models remained at the prototype stage. Their production was never mastered at Izhmash. The prototype Nadia 750 was another V-twin production attempt. And the serial production model PMZ A750 that followed a little later. And Pyotr Mozharov was directly involved in the creation of this machine. By the decree of the VSNKH on October 5, 1931, a decision was made to produce motorcycles for the Red Army in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The BMW motorcycle was used as a prototype for the chassis design. The duplex frame, made of stamped profiles, folded inside the fuel tank with a capacity of 21 liters, which was quite innovative, worked with the front spring fork. The engine was based on a 750cc V-type side valve model from Harley-Davidson. The prototypes of Nadia A750 were ready by 1933 past testing and were recommended for mass production. In 1934, production was organized at the Podolsk mechanical plant. This was the first mass-produced Soviet heavy motorcycle. By 1939, 4,636 units had been produced. Actual operation revealed the PMZ, a 750, was unreliable. One reason was the ignition timing regulator's unpredictability. So PMZ was jokingly called, "Try to start me." Also, at 40-50 kilometers per hour, the front wheel may develop increasing vibrations. In 1939, the Red Army withdrew the motorcycle from service and stopped production. After that year, V-twins were no longer seen on domestic motorcycles. Overall, in global practice, it can be observed that by the middle of the 20th century, the dominance of engines with this architecture in racing and record runs had declined. More advanced engine designs emerged, such as inline four-stroke 4s, V4S, and aggressive two-strokes in various configurations. Here's a fact. The two-cylinder V-shaped engine is only used in four-stroke configurations because the need to use separate crank chambers in a two-stroke engine doesn't allow the crank pins to be placed close to each other, which negates the advantage of the V-shaped layout for a two-cylinder engine. However, exceptions exist, like the 2023 British Langen 250 V-twin with a two-stroke engine. The engineers of this motorcycle's engine managed to separate the crank chambers while preserving the L-twin layout. Although the V-twin is no longer the most advanced engine for performance, it has secured its place in several niches. Cruisers are mostly equipped with this engine because that's how it has historically been. Harley-Davidson and Indian set the standard for the classic American motorcycle, and the rest followed that image. Moto Guzzi, known for its strong history and bold choices, adopted the longitudinal twin in '67 and has stuck with it, just as Ducati has remained loyal to the 90-degree V-twin. Big touring enduros, motards, and street bikes from KTM use a V-twin, although lately there's been a trend towards switching to a parallel twin. Let's not forget Japan's many V-twins, including cruisers, road bikes, touring, and sport bikes. So, dear viewers, during these 20 minutes of narration, or however long we've been talking, we've only discussed a small selection of motorcycles with V-twin engines, and some cars also use this engine type. If you're interested, comment to show support, and I'll make a separate video discussing it. We've covered the big picture, when and how the V-twin was built, which manufacturers started it, and who became market leaders. Now I suggest we look at this engine in the context of increasing the angle between the cylinders. While working on this material, I kept wondering why V-twins have such a wide variety of cylinder angles ranging from 40 to 90 degrees. Why didn't engineers and designers settle on just a couple of the most optimal values? Why does essentially the same engine have such variability? And while digging through a lot of materials and editing the story at the same time, I came across a very good English language article that, in just a few well-written paragraphs, clarified everything. Look, the most common crankshaft design for a V-twin has a single crank pin shared by both connecting rods. This design results in a strong and compact crankshaft. And the biggest problem in creating a V-twin was that the piston skirts would hit each other near the bottom dead center. Early DVS engines often had cylinders with diameters much smaller than their piston strokes. It was this condition that allowed Gottlieb Daimler to create a 17-degree V-twin. At the dawn of the spread of V-twins on motorcycles, angles like 42, 45, 47, 50, and others were set by the cylinder piston, group dimensions, and the need to prevent the piston skirts from meeting, and by the engine's compactness. Back then, V-twins were usually made by modifying existing single-cylinder engines. Same goes for Indian, Harley-Davidson, and so on. Secondly, it was preferable to fit the twin into the frame of the previous single-cylinder motorcycle model with minimal modifications. It's simply cheaper. As for the V-twin with offset crank pins, the number of motorcycles using this solution in their engine is very small. For example, the racing Moto Guzzi Battaliondrica which debuted in 1933, Japanese brands Honda and Suzuki experimented with V-twin engines with offset crank pins in the 80s, including models like the Honda 650 Hawk Shadow, Suzuki Intruder, and VX800. The idea was as follows. Offset crank pins provide first-order vibration balance, provided that the crank pin offset angle plus twice the angle between the cylinders equals 180. Unlike Guzzi, these engines did not have a central bearing on the crankshaft. The offset crank pins were instead connected in the center of the crank by a relatively thin disc. Everything was fine at the engine's design revolutions per minute, but when the engines were modified for racing, the crankshaft's lifespan dropped sharply. This design was later abandoned. Based on the information we've gathered about the effect of the CPG size on the cylinder bank angle, it becomes clear that if we want to create a high-performance V-twin, we'll need cylinders with a large diameter. This will allow us to increase the size and number of valves for better cylinder filling. And to create a high-revving sports engine, we need a short piston stroke. Such engines will have a large cylinder bank angle, and it's all because of the notorious piston skirt collision. Check out sporty V-twins. The angle between their cylinders ranges from 60 to 90 degrees. The Aprilia RSV Mille has 60 degrees, KTM 75, and Ducati 90. Among V-twins, only the 90-degree one, the so-called L-twin, is balanced in terms of first-order vibrations. The others can be balanced either by offsetting the crank pins, which is extremely rare, or by using balance shafts. It's now the most common technology. Let's discuss the angles. And opening the parade is an extremely rare and unique machine. This is the British motorcycle matchless Silver Arrow with an 18-degree V-twin. This machine was built by one of the oldest British motorcycle companies, and the development was handled by one of the company's owners, engineer and two-time Isle of Man Tourist Trophy winner Charles Richard Collier. At first glance, it may seem that the Silver Arrow's engine is an inline engine, but that's not the case. Take a look at this engine diagram. This was an interesting attempt to make a V-type engine using a monoblock design. The narrow cylinder bank angle allowed for a single cylinder head with all cylinders cast as one piece. The 18-degree angle had no other practical value. The design is somewhat similar to the technical solution Lancia used on its early V4 engines. The Silver Arrow 2-cylinder had a 400cc displacement and a maximum power of 16 horsepower. The engine had a long stroke, 54mm cylinder diameter, and an impressive 86mm stroke. The motorcycle was produced from 1929 to 1933. The machine was extravagant and produced during the Great Depression. These conditions kept production low, with fewer than 2,000 Silver Arrows made in 4 years. And now, from 18 degrees, we immediately jump to 42. Those who listened carefully to the episode already remember that this angle was chosen in 1904 by Kedstrom and Kendi, the co-founders of the Indian Company. And from that year until the early 50s, all Indian V-twins, except for the military model 841, which I'll talk about a bit later, stayed true to the 42-degree angle. The notorious cubic inch measurement is to blame. Indian chose this value. Everyone was satisfied with it for 50 years. Next comes the 45-degree angle. Here are all the classic Harley-Davidson engines, from the 1907 V-twin prototype to today. This is also Harley's patented exhaust sound. This corner is also lined with Japanese cruiser engines like the Honda, VT 1100 Suzuki, VX800 and Suzuki Boulevard C50. The Vincent Rapide model A motorcycle had a 47-degree cylinder angle. In 1936, Phil Irving and Phil Vincent began building excellent and powerful 1-liter V-twins. And so the Vincent Rapide model appeared, the first generation of which was produced from 1936 to 1939, that is, until the start of World War II. And since, as usual, the main parts of the single-cylinder engine were used as the basis, when adapting the design to the existing cylinder and piston dimensions, a 47-degree angle was chosen. The B model was developed during the war and launched in 1946 after the war ended. The engine was redesigned with a 50-degree angle to serve as a stressed element of the frame. Several other machines use a 50-degree twin, but first, let's note the 49-degree angle found in modern Indian Thunderstroke engines. This engine appeared in 2013 as part of the revival of the legendary American motorcycle company. The Thunderstroke engine is used in the Chief, Chieftain, Roadmaster, and Springfield models. And now it's time to continue talking about the 50-degree V-twins. Besides the Vincent Rapide B Black Shadow and Black Prince, this cylinder angle engine was also used in the Birmingham Small Arms Model Y. From 1919 to 1924, Bro Superior SS from 1924 to 1936, Matchless Model X from 1929 to 1940, Kawasaki Vulcan 1500, and also on all Victory motorcycles.
Gentlemen, the Victory Vision is my dream bike.
52 degrees. Honda Shadow from 1997 to the present. The Honda motorcycle family represented by the Transalp, Deauville, and NTV models, basically with the same engine. Kawasaki Vulcan, 2000 from 2004 to 2010. 54 degrees. Suzuki Boulevard, C109R, and its counterpart M109R, 55 degrees. Kawasaki Vulcan 750 from 1985 to 2006, and from 2006 to the present, its successor, the Vulcan 900 Classic 56.25 degrees. Yes, that's right, this exact angle, completely incomprehensible to the average person, is used in the SNSX wedge engine. Next, we have 60 degrees. This is a golden mean between compactness and balance. Engines with this cylinder bank angle require only one balanced shaft. V-twins of this architecture are installed on the Yamaha XV 250 Dragstar, 250, and a number of Indian motorcycles, in particular, the Scout, Challenger, and Pursuit. In 2001, Harley-Davidson. In the V-Rod model, they moved to a more powerful 60-degree twin, which featured a number of innovations for the brand: 4-valve heads, liquid cooling, and so on. Porsche representatives helped develop the engine. The Harley community reacted with hostility to the V-Rod. It's not for nothing that it got the nickname Outcast. For die-hard brand fans, this piece of engineering was alien. The angle was wrong, and it wasn't air-cooled. The new developments proved useful, leading to Harley's debut of the Revolution Max, a new 60-degree V-twin, in 2021. This engine powers the company's first adventure touring bike, Pan America. S&S and Spute made 60-degree engines. Sports bikes also start from this angle, like the Aprilia Racing Sport V Melee or the Harley-Davidson V-Twin Racing 1000. 70 degrees. These are the Suzuki RGV 250 engines, the 98th year Yamaha Virago 535. 87th to 2004 Yamaha Dragstar 650 from 97th to the present. The 72-degree angle is interesting. Engineer Franco Lambertini from Moto Marini settled on this value. In the early 70s, he aimed to create a competitive, powerful civilian motorcycle in the 350 and 500cc class. The requirements were a very light engine and the ability to make single-cylinder engines with half the displacement using the same crankcase. Franco settled on a very interesting cylinder bank angle. Geometrically, 72 degrees is the angle between each cylinder and 5-cylinder radial engines. Lambertini did not mention whether he was inspired by aircraft engines. He only said that such an engine is sufficiently balanced without the need to reach a 90-degree angle. In addition, Franco used very interesting combustion chambers called Heron, and their efficiency is greatest in short-stroke engines with a high compression ratio. Moto Morini, 350 and 500 with this V-twin were made from 1974 to 1989. In 1980, Marini's 500 ECC twin was used in the Camel 500 Enduro model. Another engineer who liked the 72-degree angle is Eric Buell. Eric strives for maximum performance from his engines and the machines they're installed in. Eric Buell Racing 1190 RR with 185 horsepower and 126 Newton meters of torque is an example of that. 75 degrees. The first thing that immediately comes to mind is the legendary KTM V-twin LC8, which is used on the Adventure, the Motard SMC, the Naked Duke, and the RC8 Racer. Also, the Hyosung Grand Touring 250 from 2005, the Yamaha Virago from 1981 to 2008, and the Yamaha Dragstar 400 and 1,180 degrees. Such an engine with a longitudinal layout in the frame was used on the Honda CX series motorcycles from 1978 to 1983. This angle is found in Rotax 810, 660, and 490 engines, 87 degrees. Also an unusual angle for a V-type engine. And guess who stood out? Franco Lambertini from Moto Morini. In 2005, this company introduced the Corsaro 1200 motorcycle with a Bielbero Corsacorta engine. And why Franco stopped at 87, falling 3 degrees short of the L-twin, is completely unclear. Maybe he didn't want to make something like Ducati. Now we've reached the island of stability, 90 degrees. A special case of the V-twin, called the L-twin, and usually when it comes to an engine of this configuration, everyone first remembers Ducati. Ducati popularized the term L-twin. So, after World War II, Ducati started with light motorcycles and scooters, the kind of things that were popular in Italy and Europe. The main achievements of Ducati are closely linked to the name of the designer Fabio Taglioni. The 90-degree twin was born on March 20th, 1970. The British historian Ian Phelan says that Taglioni drew his first sketch of the V-twin on the last day of winter in 1970. Soon the engine was brought to life in metal, and in 1971, the 750 Grand Touring model made its debut. Taglioni focused on practicality and building an efficient, balanced engine. For 50 years, this engine, particularly with the desmodromic valve system, defined Ducati. However, the world does not stand still, and in recent years, the Italian company has started moving towards a V4 configuration in its larger engines. You shouldn't think that Taglioni was the first to come up with a 90-degree twin. In 1902, at the start of motorcycle history, a French motocarton already featured a longitudinal 90-degree V-twin. And even then, engineers understood the advantages and disadvantages that this layout offered. By the way, all longitudinal twins of Moto Guzzi also have a 90-degree angle. The military version of Indian 841, Japanese motorcycle makers also adopted the L-twin, using it in Suzuki SV 400 650 1000, TL 1000 V-Strom 650 and 1000, and Honda VTR 1000F RC51 VT 125 Shadow. And now, moving away from the fairly popular V-twin cylinder angles, we're once again returning to the exotic. We've come to the 120-degree angle. Such an engine was used in the Moto Guzzi Bicylindrica 500 motorcycle. This motorcycle was a very iconic racing machine in the history of the Italian company. This unusual machine was developed by Carlo Guzzi in the early 1930s to dominate in racing. The catalyst was the 1931 failure of the supercharged four-cylinder model and the outdated classic horizontal single-cylinder engine. Carlo saw the need for something new, and expanding on the successful single-cylinder, 250 added a second cylinder at a 120-degree angle. This angle was determined by several reasons. First, to ensure the best possible cooling. The high-performance racing engine generated significant heat. Also, unlike other V-twins of that era, the connecting rod journal was not shared. To reduce the twisting forces on the crankshaft, a bearing was used between the connecting rods. The Italians managed to create an extremely successful racing motorcycle that combined sufficient power and reliability, as well as low weight and a good chassis. Bicilindrica Piazzot made its Grand Prix debut in 1933. With a break for World War II, it competed all the way until 1951. In 1935, this motorcycle, with the racer Stenley Woods, won the senior class at the Tourist Trophy race on the Isle of Man. At first, the engine produced 41 horsepower, and by the late 40s, 47. The machine could accelerate up to 200 kilometers per hour. The last motorcycle in this race has a cylinder bank angle of up to 170 degrees. This is the German Army motorcycle Sundap KS 750, but there's a catch. The Sundap KS 750 engine is either a 170-degree V-twin with 180-degree crank pins, or a boxer with a non-standard cylinder angle. This topic is debatable. Here's my opinion. Based on the history of Sundap motorcycles, I tend to believe that the engine of the Sundap KS 750 is an exotic version of a boxer engine. Before the KS 750, the Sundap lineup included several boxer engines, K400, K500, KS 600, and K800, but no V-twins. Many of these motorcycles were used by the Wehrmacht, but remained only slightly modified civilian models for military use. The KS 750 was developed solely for military use. Each engine cylinder was raised 5 degrees from horizontal to boost ground clearance. And at this point in the story, I greet everyone who likes to call a two-cylinder boxer engine a V-twin with a cylinder angle of 180 degrees. Let's figure it out. One of the main philosophies of the V-twin engine is the shared crank pin. As you may have noticed, with the exception of one Moto Guzzi motorcycle and a couple of Hondas and Suzukis, all V-twins have a single shared crank pin. If we build an engine with a 180-degree angle, it will work like this. And what's the point of such a two-cylinder engine? It vibrates like crazy. These shots from the channel, where the author builds engines from KAV parts, make it clear. It's a different story if we smooth out the vibrations by adding at least one more pair of cylinders. Moreover, if we look into history, both options, the boxer and the V-twin, appeared almost at the same time and developed in parallel. Carl Benz, who first built a boxer engine, called it a contra engine. Soon after, the term horizontally opposed, or boxer, became established. A boxer engine can theoretically be seen as a specific type of V-twin with crank pins 180 degrees apart, but that's only in theory. Enough with the rhetoric. If you're interested in boxer engines, I have a big episode about them on my channel. Friends, we've examined many V-twin engines, focusing on cylinder bank angles. I tried to include all existing types, but with so many I might have missed some. If I missed your favorite motorcycle, don't take it personally. I promised we'd discuss motorcycles with longitudinal V-twin engines in this episode. The number of models of this bike type is higher than just the Moto Guzzi lineup from '66 and the Honda CX. This kind of engine layout offered both a number of advantages and disadvantages. Among the advantages, we can note the following: good cooling from the incoming airflow, which is important for air-cooled engines. The possibility of using a driveshaft final drive and creating a layout where the engine, gearbox, and driveshaft are arranged one after another in a straight line. Disadvantages: the motorcycle is wider, the power unit is more likely to be damaged in a fall, and the rotating masses create a reactive moment that causes the bike to lean as engine speed increases. How well do you remember the beginning of this story? The first motorcycle with a longitudinal V-twin was built in 1902 by the Frenchman Émile Robillon and was called the Moto Cardan. The model was made in small batches for a few years. I wouldn't rule out that in the early days of motorcycle manufacturing, there were other similar machines. In 1929, prototypes IZH-1 and IZH-2 were built in Ijevsk. We've already talked about them with you. In 1931, the British company AJS model S3 developed a similar motorcycle. The S3 featured a 500cc 50-degree twin engine producing just 5 horsepower. It was efficiently cooled and compact, barely extending beyond the fuel tank. Unlike most motorcycles with a longitudinal twin, the AJS transmitted torque to the rear wheel by chain. The bike was conceived as a luxury touring motorcycle, and that was its downfall during the Depression era. The AJS S3 cost more than the company's powerful 1-liter model. The project was shut down, and by the end of '31, the company itself went bankrupt and was bought out by Matchless. The next motorcycle comes from Germany. This is the 1938 Arty 750, designed by Norbert Riedel and Richard Kuhn. Wikipedia and a couple of other sources claim that this is a 2-stroke V-twin, but that's not true. It's actually a 4-stroke engine with side valves. Several prototypes were made, but the war stopped further development. Next, we have the previously mentioned Indian 841. In 1941, the United States government approached Harley-Davidson and Indian with an order to develop a special motorcycle for combat operations in North Africa. Several requirements were proposed, such as efficient engine cooling in hot climates and a shaft drive for the rear wheel. Harley-Davidson presented their XA model to the military for evaluation. John Novak, creator of the XA, largely copied the BMW R71's power unit and transmission. But Indian chose a different path, introducing the 841 model with a 744cc longitudinal 90-degree V-twin and 24 horsepower. Both motorcycles suffered the same fate. After building 1,056 Indian motorcycles and approximately the same number of opposed Harleys, the operation in Africa ended. The motorcycles, which cost more than Indian's Chief and Scout or Harley's WLA, proved unnecessary. The Lambretta 250 Grand Prix, introduced in 1951, was Italy's first motorcycle with a longitudinal V-twin. Its 90-degree twin, with a displacement of 247 cc, produced a maximum of 29 horsepower and allowed it to accelerate up to 170 kilometers per hour. The motorcycle competed until 1953. Another outstanding example of this type is the Victoria Fiu 35 Bergmeister from Germany. The Victoria company from Nuremberg was quite bold in its developments. Initial ideas for a new, fundamentally different model from competitors emerged in early 1951. In 1953, the V35 model debuted with an 80-degree overhead valve, 350cc twin engine, producing 21 horsepower. However, the company struggled, and by the late 50s, it had disappeared. Only about 1,000 of these motorcycles were produced. A Japanese company, Maruso Lilac, followed a similar path of building machinery as Victoria. From 59 to 64, machinery with engine capacities from 125 to 300 cubic centimeters was available on the market. Despite the strong resemblance to the German Phi 35 Bergmeister, the Japanese took a slightly different approach. The Maruso Lilac featured a 66-degree V-twin angle, just one more to add to the list of V-twin angles. In the mid-60s, changes were brewing at Moto Guzzi. In '64, Carlo Guzzi passed away. The new management wanted to create a new engine and enter profitable markets to stay afloat. In 1965, Giulio Cesare Carcana created a longitudinal 90-degree V-twin which is still Moto Guzzi's trademark. In the late 60s, Carcana was pursuing a profitable contract with Italian authorities to supply motorcycles to the police. Moto Guzzi released a lot of models with this V-twin engine, ranging from 350 to 1,400 cc, and they continue to produce them to this day. What's the largest displacement V-twin ever put in a motorcycle? We're weighing production models and custom builds. Harley engines reach up to 1.9 liters, the Yamaha Stratoliner is similar, and the Vulcan has 2 liters. The biggest S&S engine displaces 2,350 cubic centimeters. However, that's not the limit. I have 2 real monsters in mind. The first was built by the Pole Stanislav Skóra in 1949. Stanislav worked at an airfield and, having access to aircraft parts and a production base, built the MSS-1 sidecar motorcycle, Stanislav Skóra's motorcycle. The engine displacement was an impressive 4.5 liters. It was a monstrous machine capable of carrying 8 people or even more. However, quite soon the Polish military found out about this fake and forced the motorcycle to be destroyed, claiming that Skóra had used parts and components from military aircraft. The second motorcycle is a modern creation called the Flying Millard, built by the British customizer Alan Millard. This 70-degree twin displaces 4,888 cubic centimeters, making it the largest V-twin ever in a motorcycle frame. And to wrap up all this material, I want to say a few words about the fastest V-twin motorcycles. Glenn Curtis set the first official speed record in 1903, averaging 103 kilometers per hour over 1 mile, and surpassing Peugeot's unofficial V-twin record. In that era, technological progress was moving by leaps and bounds. Already in the second half of the 1920s, George Braw was creating excellent Bro Superior motorcycles with J.A. Prestwich engines. The SS 100 production model could reach 160 kilometers per hour, while supercharged Bro Superior, Zenith, and Osborne Engineering Company motorcycles hit up to 240 kilometers per hour. Decades after the appearance of the excellent Bro in Britain, the V-twin Vincent was born. After the war, this modernized 1-liter 50-degree engine powered the world's fastest production motorcycle, the Vincent Black Shadow, and its sports version, the Black Lightning. The Black Shadow, in stock form, accelerated up to 200 kilometers per hour. In 1948, Raleigh Free set the United States speed record at the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, reaching a speed of 241.85 kilometers per hour. On a specially prepared Vincent, yes, he was really riding in just underwear, a helmet, and goggles. Later, Black Lightning set national speed records in Ireland, New Zealand, South Africa, and also Australia. You can't ignore the story of the New Zealander Bert Munro, who, dreaming of setting a speed record, spent about 20 years perfecting his old Indian Scout. Bert's efforts paid off. His Indian, which originally could only reach 90 kilometers per hour, in '62 it hit 288. 5 years later, Bert slightly increased the engine capacity and set a new record, 295.44 kilometers per hour. Although during the qualifying run, which ended in a crash, he reached a speed of 331.52 kilometers per hour. A number of speed records also belong to Harley-Davidson motorcycles. In 1970, the famous racer Kel Rayborn, on a streamliner with a Harley-Davidson Sportster engine, accelerated to 427 kilometers per hour at Bonneville. This record lasted until 1975 on July 14, 1990. Another record was set by Dave Campese on the Easy Rider Streamliner with 2 1.5-liter Harley-Davidson engines. The record was 519.609 kilometers per hour, and this result lasted for 16 years. Friends, at this point, the story comes to an end. In this material, I tried to bring together both the dry theory about V-twins and a number of interesting and entertaining facts about motorcycles with such engines and the personalities who made efforts to create all this magnificence. The V-twin is a legendary engine with a rich history. And I hope that you found this episode interesting and that you definitely didn't waste an hour of your time. Thanks for watching. This was the Crasmodo channel. See you next time.